Kelsey. Now I'd like to introduce someone that I can say I've known since she was a student. As a graduate student, Ayodele Embry Thomas, Dr. Ayodele Embry Thomas, has been a strong colleague, someone who has added to the intellectual life of this institution, but also as someone that always leads with integrity. And I know that many of you may not know, but Ayo is actually the first Black woman to receive a PhD in electrical engineering here at Stanford. So while I'd like to say that all of us that you are seeing here today, that we are Black history, Ayodele Thomas is also Black history at Stanford. And so with that being said, I also want to say that Ayo has always been very generous with her family. As director of the Black House, we led the Martin Luther King celebrations, which would be a month long of things that would happen. And we did a program in the dorms called Living History, where we invited students to think about inviting a parent or aunt or someone that is living history and lived through the civil rights movement, whether or not they were an activist, whether they were a bystander, or whether they were someone that wasn't on necessarily the right side of history. Ayodele freely shared her grandfather with us, and her grandfather came to Stanford. Her grandfather was extremely active in the civil rights movement. His house had been bombed. Her history and her lineage is so strong and deep. But with that, I'm going to stop and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ayo and her father to share with us about their family. Thank you, Ayo.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, everyone. As Jan said, my name is Ayodele Thomas, and I'm the proud descendant of enslaved people. And for years, I've introduced myself this way to my students because I want them to know that there's no shame in that designation. It is a sign of honor and of resilience. I'm a descendant of the Blue Broadus Simpson Nolan family of Central Kentucky on my father's side, and the Martin family of Western Kentucky on my mother's side. Both sides of our family have not been able to break through the wall of slavery, and sadly for many African Americans, our right to know our ancestry in Africa was intentionally stripped from us. I claim America as my own because my family has worked, fought, struggled, and died for this country for more than 200 years. As my parents taught me, America, love it enough to change it. Both my maternal and paternal sides of my family became very strong advocates for social justice and education, who passed down that legacy for generations, and it continues today. These formerly enslaved people also became farmers who own land in Kentucky, and some of that land is still in my family to this day. And I'm so blessed that my children have a connection to that land and to our family's history. They know where they come from. Today, I'm honored to introduce my father, Jim Embry, who will share just a little bit of my paternal family's proud legacy. My father considers himself stardust congealed in human form that represents billions of years of Earth's evolution. An activist since the age of 10, my father has participated in all the major social movements of his era and now believes that the sustainability movement encompasses all other movements and will serve to further bend the moral arc of the universe towards justice for all of Earth's family members. As an agrarian intellectual activist, he is the founder of Sustainable Communities Network and a leader with a focus on food and agricultural systems. He's at home at every level, whether as a 6-time U.S. delegate to the Slow Food Terra Madre in Italy, a visitor to Cuba and Brazil to study organic farming, an organizer of urban agriculture and local food projects, as a land steward on his 30-acre family farm, or sharing the legacy of George Washington Carver with high school students as he just did 2 weeks ago. As a scuba diver and a photographer, my father has traveled widely to capture the beauty of the land and the ocean, and he's now working on several books. Most recently, he had an essay in Queen Sugar author Natalie DeZille's just-released anthology on Black farmers, We Are Each Other's Harvest. And he's our family griot, collecting stories and documentation on our legacy stretching back before the Civil War. Please join me in welcoming my father, Jim Embry.
Wow, what an intro. Well, what a blessing it is for me to serve on this panel, Freedom Was Not Free, with our daughter, Ayodele, as part of Stanford's Juneteenth recognition. Now, on behalf of Ayo's family, her mother Deborah, all of her siblings and extended family, I want to thank Stanford University for providing an academic home as well as an enjoyable and at times challenging place to work for our daughter. When you all brought Ayo into the university family, you got somebody pretty special. Or is that pretty and special? Well, you ought to keep her as long as you can. And a big thank you to Letty McGuire for sharing her family legacy and photos, and all the other folk on the committee that shared their family legacy, but described so well where we have been and the work that lies ahead of us. Thank you all. We all understand so well that our family legacies, the Smith family, the Ballou Broadus Simpson Nolan family on my mother's side, the Embry Gilbert family on my father's side, and the Martin Mapp family on my in-laws' side. These legacies are so very similar to the rich stories of the 4 million enslaved Africans who were emancipated and celebrated the end of 250 years of dehumanizing slavery and the Middle Passage Holocaust. So our brief stories are meant to honor and lift up all of these ancestral spirits and vibrations. Now, speaking of vibrations, my short remarks today will come from my essay in the book, as Ayo mentioned, We Are Each Other's Harvest, by my dear friend Natalie Bazile. This essay is entitled Ancestral Vibrations Connect Us to the Land, and it's subtitled We Are the Seeds of Our Ancestors' Dreams. You can get the book to read the essay or and other wonderful entries, or you can contact me, our daughter Ayo, or the university and get this essay free in PDF format. Now, of course, we are quite pleased that Juneteenth is now a federal holiday, Holy Day, which provides enhanced opportunities for reckoning, reflection, and action to address still prevailing injustices. But in my view, there are a few things missing from the celebrations. Without a doubt, Juneteenth is about the end of enslavement, the jubilation of freedom, and the recognition of our rich African-American cultural traditions. But it is also about reunification of our blood-stained and divided country. We must remember that for 5 years, we were two separate nations with different flags, constitutions, and presidents. It was the entry of 180,000 Black men and women into the war that turned the tide, sealed the Union victory, and made it possible for reunification. This emancipation and reunification in the USA was one of the most significant events globally in the 19th century. Now, one other missing piece is that emancipation also provided opportunities for our ancestors to reestablish sacred relationships with the land, with the water, with the air, with the plants and animals, which was part of our African traditions and also taught to us so well by our indigenous brothers and sisters. Our ancestors, in spite of the terrorism of slavery, were about working the land, taking care of the land, loving the land, while also nurturing right relationships with everyone. So Juneteenth should be a cornerstone of the sustainability movement that addresses climate change and environmental degradation while also encouraging an earth-centric worldview and lifestyle. Now my family. From our research, our family members were brought to Kentucky from Virginia in 1800 near where I live right now. They were primarily caretakers of the land, or farmers. We established very close family ties. That's why our reunion is called the Ballou, Broadus, Simpson, Nolan Family Reunion. We were allowed to form a church body in the 1850s as a spiritual resting place. And after the war ended, we helped found our church and a school right across from our farm still today. On my mother and father's side of the family, we had combined 3 great-great-grandfathers that served as soldiers in the Union Army as part of what's called the U.S. Covered Troops. These family members, brothers were Jackson and George Ballou and Lewis Gilbert. Of the approximately 180,000 members of the U.S. Covered Troops, 36,000 died. That's about a 20% mortality rate, which is 35% greater than that among white troops. So freedom was not free. My great-great-grandfather, Jackson Ballou, died in the Civil War and left behind his wife, Elizabeth, and their 7 children. It is because Elizabeth survived and thrived that I am here today speaking on this panel. Now, here is someone who we would say was illiterate. Great-grandmother Elizabeth could not read or write and signed with an X. But she guided and inspired all of her children to eventually own small farms and businesses. A daughter became the area midwife and herbal doctor. 2 sons operated a blacksmith shop. And her youngest son, my great-grandfather, Don Carlos, went to Berea College in 1879, became a school teacher, and was friends with folks like W.E.B. Du Bois, Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, and George Washington Carver. And folks ask us where we get our activism and love for education. Now you know. Now, before I close, I want to go back, if I can, to George Ballou, who fought with Company A of the 114th Regiment Infantry of the USCT. This unit fought against General Lee in Virginia, surrounded him, kicked his butt, and forced his surrender. So George was at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865, when General Grant and General Lee met to end the war. Later in mid-May, our great-grandfather George and his 114th Regiment were shipped off to Texas to defeat the remaining Confederate troops and to secure the area so General Granger could come in safely and announce in Galveston his General Order 3. So it was also the site of 12,000 Black troops marching down the streets of Brazos and Galveston, Texas, that angered white folks, but also inspired our enslaved ancestors to shout hallelujah and jump for joy. The USCT, in my mind, was the legalized armed insurrection of 180,000 Black men and women who were fighting for the freedom of their families. And as we have learned, most of these Black soldiers were listed as farmers. So what we have is an insurrection of farmers who put down their hoes, plows, and farm tools and picked up rifles and swords to fight and win the Civil War. When the war ended, these soldiers turned their swords into plowshares. Now, let me end my talk with two of my favorite poets. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Maya Angelou, one more. But one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. But that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. The hill we climb, Amanda Gorman. Thank you, love you all much.
Thank you, thank you. I think everyone in this webinar that we cannot see that they are all clapping, they are all clapping. I just want you to know that you have blessed us with your child, but you have also blessed us today with your words. And there were so many things I think that resonated with not only those of us who have been part of this program, but also those in the audience. So what we want to do is give people a chance to do Q&A. I believe that the tech people will let me know of any questions that they have. And so what I want to actually start off with is, as you have shepherded and curated this history, can you talk just a little bit about, it's your father whose home was bombed, or your father-in-law?
Father-in-law. Yes.
Father-in-law, right?
James Mapp. Mm-hmm.
James Mapp. Okay.
And his wife, Viola. Yeah.
Right. So
Both their house.
What I liked about when you did sort of tie the theme, freedom was not free. Sometimes people only think about, oh, that was just like the 20 years after slavery, right? So now let's move us into that moment of you knowing this piece of history that isn't in the distant past, and this freedom is not free concept.
Oh, regarding the house bombing?
The house bombing, yes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And just a quick word. Ayo mentioned, introduced my father and mother-in-law, James Map, Viola Map. Viola Map. Our family was from Muhlenberg County, West Kentucky, and I call him Brother Map. I refer to him, was from Chattanooga and part of Georgia. But again, both James and Viola were civil rights leaders, icons, pretty much their whole life. This dynamic duo, okay, this tag team match, okay, incredible forces there in Chattanooga. But as we know, after the Civil War, there was all kinds of violence that was perpetrated, all throughout the South and the North. That led to the Black Codes, the Jim Crow laws, and so forth. Even though we achieved a lot, what the boys call Black Reconstruction, if you will, we suffered a lot. And this continuing violence was a common thread almost every day. From the church bombing in Birmingham that we know about, to the to the house bombing that the Maps experienced. But what's important to realize is that those kinds of elements of violence didn't deter Black folk from getting up in the morning as they did, boarding up the house where it was bombed at, and on the streets the next day, okay? The next day organizing, having meetings and things like that. So I think it's the resilience of our people from the moment of being put on a ship, okay, in Africa, to coming this way and surviving all these years. The resilience, the capacity, the human, divinely, given gift of like getting up and keep on keeping on is kind of the idea, okay?
Right.
And we know that the kinds of bombings that we experienced, there in Chattanooga with the Map family, I think it steeled them more, I think, okay? And yeah, you bombed our house. Fortunately, nobody was injured, fortunately. But this is just going to increase our resolve to be out there making change. They were throughout the state. And these individuals, we know it wasn't just one person, Dr. King, that led the movement. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of people who were involved in the civil rights movement. And we always try to lift up, the courage and the actions of these ancestors.
Okay, so I've got a question from the audience that if you're comfortable sharing, and any of the speakers, that they're interested in hearing about the process of doing this ancestry research. For example, were their family histories primarily passed down through oral tradition? Were services like Ancestry.com used to help go further back and or out, right? And what kinds of records were used to help identify these family histories? So Ayo and your father, if you can answer first and maybe one or two before so we can get other questions in.
I'll just say quickly, oral history for us was essential. It was key. Mm-hmm. Again, we come from the African griot traditions, being able to tell family stories back hundreds and thousands of years. And I was just blessed. My great-grandfather founded our reunion. He was enslaved again, and he was just carrying on the history, but his task was to connect always his mama's side and his daddy's side, okay? How he did it. But yeah, I came along at a time, my mother was our reunion president, and she kind of passed the torch on to me. And so military records are just really key and essential. But again, back to oral history, that was key. We've done, 4 or 5 family history books. We do one every, commemorative, like this is our 80th reunion, commemorative reunion. But, yes, all the different websites, all the different ancestry type, websites are really valuable. But I would say what's really key, again, never forget oral history. Whoever is your elders in your family, go talk to them, interview them, get it on video, get it on audio tape, okay, while they're still living, and they can remember this history. So family is key. But we've been to the archives in Washington. We've been to the courthouses. We've been, we just scratch and pull things from any kind of location. If I can be of any help, just contact me, and I will be happy to share some of the like 101 genealogy.
Is there anyone else on the call that wants to speak to their family? We're going to move into another question right after. Unmute yourself.
Jan, hi. I would agree, oral history. And in our family, on both sides, there's always been one family member. And for me, it was my first cousin who always had a liking for history. And she was raised by my grandmother. So she got the oral stories. Before computers and everything, she drove around to the different places where we heard these stories about family members. And she looked up birth records. She visited cemeteries to, be able to connect the dots. And then, of course, all of the tools now we have with Ancestry and 23andMe has helped us actually know now a little bit more about West Africa as a place where, the slaves were taken from in our family. And also to get to know a little bit more about our Native American, to be able to see that my grandmother, paternal grandmother, is actually part Native American. And now to trace her history is a challenge because the Native American population moved around so much. So yeah, I would tend to ditto the stories and just one person maybe in the family that really has an interest in keeping the legacy alive.
Okay. So someone else has said it's so discouraging to only be learning about so much of this history as an adult. How do we ensure our children are being taught a full picture of U.S. history? So anyone want to tackle that one?
I could speak to that a little bit. I think it's actually our job to do it. Growing up in my parents' house, we had so many history books about Black history that I was able to read. They made sure we had exposure to lots of that history, those things that were kind of publicly known, but also kind of little known facts as well. Encouraging your students to do a lot of that research and to you sharing it with them as well. Thankfully, there's lots of videos and movies and things like that that are able to help kind of tie those pieces of history together. But the reality is that we cannot leave it to others to fill in those blanks. We can also look at the textbooks our children are learning from to see what holes are there or misinformation is in those textbooks and advocate with our school boards to get those textbooks updated to reflect a more full perspective of history.
Okay, I think someone told me that the largest publishers of school textbooks are in Texas. Okay, so that's the answer to that right there. So as a Southern, I feel I can say that. So here's the other thing I'd like to mention. My kids have grown up in Palo Alto Unified School District. The second grade assignment was your ancestors. I think Io might be a little familiar with this one, telling about your ancestors. The questions were, how did your ancestors get here? By plane, by train, by boat, by car? Next question, how did they feel when they arrived? And so my husband and I are like, well, I'm not gonna say what we said, but we were like, okay, write this down. My ancestors came here in the hull of a slave ship. How did they feel when they got here? For those who survived the track, I'm sure they were unhappy. I mean, just the perspective that no one had thought about what this might be broader than very much so an international, because an international kind of school, that you had to think about this. So all I can say is I'm sure the teacher's lounge was like really popping on the next day. So I've got another question from someone who says, what do you all possibly think about all of the conversations right now about critical race theory not having that engaged, involved, or anything to do with our educational system at all? So anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, real quickly, I've addressed this, a few times here recently, and I'll point out that our very founding documents was based upon critical race theory. The Constitution said people who were indigenous weren't even people, that African people were just 3/5 of a person. They talked about liberty and justice for all, but while the same way saying that, they said, well, we're going to keep everyone enslaved. That's a critical race theory in practice. The black codes, the Jim Crow laws, I can go on and on. Even when Granger came to Texas and talked about, okay, everybody here is free, but he said, y'all don't be lazy, okay? Don't be lazy and whatever, because if you do so, you can be arrested. So way back then, the whole prison pipeline developed from people who were recently emancipated being put back in to these chain gangs. So I'd like to point out that we have been living our entire nation's history on a white supremacist critical race theory. And now we're trying to come in and say, hey, let's flip it a little bit and open it up for African Americans and people of color to begin to address things so we can move on as a country and find some freedom, find some justice, find some equity, and things like that.
Anyone else? I'm not sure anybody can come behind this.
I definitely cannot come behind that. I do have a thought that I'll offer anyway.
Yeah.
And that's just that I think it should come as no surprise to us that critical race theory is under attack in this particular moment, where we also see voting rights coming under fire. And we're coming out of hopefully coming out of a period where as the pandemic gets more and more under control, we know that pandemic intersects with anti-Black and anti-Asian violence pandemics, and that all of that has sparked a kind of renewed interest, not for many of us in Black and other communities of color, but renewed interest for others in anti-racism and racial justice work. And so as we see that moving forward and our institutions and our communities are thinking more about changes that need to be made, we're also going to see that resistance and opposition on the other end. So it's just all really connected, and it underscores the fact that we have to continue the work. We can't assume that, all right, we've developed curriculum and we've held these forums and we've had these discussions and, we've told our students or we've told our staff, all right, you need to invest in some DEI training or be sure you're not being racist to your colleagues or your classmates. And that's kind of it. And we go back, in the fall and business as usual. Like that's not going to get it. So the fight continues, and it's what we should be expecting to see, and just underscores the work that there is to be done.
I think that I've heard people within higher education say, when higher ed says we're going to put together task force and committees, that's like the United States saying we're sending you your thoughts and prayers. And that's going to be it, right? So I wanted to say I did a wardrobe change during the thing. And so I have on a shirt that says, I am Black history. And my cousins sent all of us this. And I consider that all of us who walk in this world to be of African descent, to be Black history, we all have a narrative. We all have a story. And a lot of times it has not been unearthed. I also moved positions. Behind me is a quilt of my family. And I am from the Maurice Pons Braget plantations, plural, right? Out, you can tell, Louisiana. My father's first name was Braget. It's not that long ago when you really think about the years, right? And I can say to you as a person who has been to the visit of one of the homes, we were told before we went, we were warned, if they mention slavery, they're going to say that the slaves were happy and treated well. And they did not mention slavery, but yet we brought it up. And what did they say? that they were happy. He was from France. He treated them so what, sort of blaze bon temps roulette. No, it's not Mardi Gras. It was not Mardi Gras during this time of slavery. And so as someone who is descendant and been there, I also have looked at this from a perspective of they're like 5 or plus plantation, beautiful homes. I wasn't able to bear witness to that and have any opportunity to have that, right, as my home. And so when you look at the vestiges of slavery, and yes, a lot of us on this call, we've done well, our parents have done well. However, it's not just us. Don't use us as the example of what has happened. It is a dynamic that exists amongst people who are descendants, all descendants of enslaved people. So with that being said, I want to give this last parting thought. Someone contacted me when I sent out something about this event. And the person said, I really thank you for doing this. And as a descendant of people who enslaved people, I thank you for sharing this history as I share mine. And with that being said, I want to thank everyone that has participated in this program. Io, your father, I'm coming to Kentucky. Let me just tell you all that right now. I'm coming to Kentucky, okay? I just want to thank all of you for freely sharing and sharing your history, because for some of us, it can be painful. But I think that what everyone in the audience has seen today, that there is a pride that you existed, that you said, Io, it is one of resilience and power. And I think if you can sit down with possibly your colleagues who are descendants of enslaved people, that you will find this as well. And I also encourage people to do the work of the history of your own family, which I'm still embarking on. And I have to mention African Ancestry.com as well, which is co-owned by a Stanford alum, Gina Page. And so I just want to give that plug for her company as well. Thank you all for attending in the audience, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you all so much.
Love y'all. Bye. Thank you.
Love you too.